My name is Kylah Morrison, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the mindset of raising capital. I'd like to acknowledge the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation on the land in which I'm recording this webinar today, and also acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who might be listening in. And I really hope that you take something away and get value from this session today. What I'm going to run through is just a few things, but to start with, helping you ask the questions about why you might want to raise capital, things to consider, what investors are looking for and how you might be able to stand out from the crowd, building trust and rapport, which is incredibly important if you want to be able to influence change through the business that you run and seek the capital to grow that business or organization, and then the power of storytelling. So what is it that you need to consider before raising capital? I think the number one thing to consider is investor relationships and the fact that they are long-term. So I've lived and worked up in the Pilbara in the northwest of Australia for a number of years now. I ran the Chamber of Commerce up there, and I saw a lot of business organisations that were looking to grow and scale, and a number of them were having conversations with Aboriginal businesses, potentially along the lines of joint venture agreements. And the lack of understanding about joint ventures, investment into businesses, whether that's Indigenous or non-Indigenous, really didn't consider how long the relationship would actually be lasting for, and more importantly, whether their values were aligned. So that's another key aspect to think about. If you are seeking money from someone, you're going to want to get a return from that investment, be it time or money that they're investing or skill sets. And so at that second point in the bottom there on the slide, are your values aligned, is a really crucial thing to consider. There will be points in your business journey where you have to make really tough decisions, and you want to know that your investors or people who have given you money are going to be on the same page as you and have similar values or viewpoints on situations, or if they don't, that you are going to be able to have those difficult conversations in a respectful and meaningful way so that two of you can come together to a solution that is the best for both parties. You also need to think about the skill sets that you need. So not all of investment is financial. So yes, you'll be looking for dollars to grow and increase your business, whether that's needing money for investing in capital, so buying equipment or products or buildings and things like that, whether it's to scale your marketing or grow your team. But what an investor can often bring is skill sets. So other talents and experiences that you might not have in your business that can help you grow and scale your business. So have a think about that before you look for investors, and think about the real reason for what you're seeking investment. Do you actually need the funds, or perhaps you're going to be able to generate enough revenue from your customers and your sales of your products and services, and actually what you need is the skill sets and the experience and potentially the mentoring and coaching. And finally, know that your investors are looking for a return on their investment. A lot of traditional investors, like your banks, venture capitalists, they want to see a growth in your company, so the number of products and sales that you sell growing over time, so that when they then sell out their percentage or equity that they have in your company, they make money on that investment that they put in years before. And so they want to also know how quickly that demand will grow. There is organisations and angel investors, friends and family who may be open to lending funds or investing in your business, and may be seen as patient capital, where it might be a longer term arrangement before they're looking for a return on their investment. But it's something to consider when you are seeking funding, is what is that investor or that person or organisation looking for as a return on investment, and how quickly do they want to see that return. Typical things that investors are looking for. I'm not going to go through it in all of the detail because Kent does a fantastic overview of your capital raising readiness. On the left-hand side there are all the typical traits of what an investor will look for. Essentially, the experiences that I've had in organisations where we have given out grant funding, or in the Australian Innovation Competition that I led in 2023, we were looking for three key factors. So one was the market fit. Is there a clear customer demand for your product or service, whether that be actual or potential based on your knowledge of the problem that that customer has that your product or service can solve. It's really critical that what you're doing in business actually solves a problem for the customer, because revenue is the cheapest form of funding that you'll ever be able to get, because you won't have to pay anyone back. Potential impact is the second thing out of those three key factors, and that is how big that potential market is. So at the moment, maybe you have a customer base that is local, or you could be serving a business or an organization or a school that's down the road in your local community. But how many other organizations similar to that, schools, businesses, companies, internationally, globally, might also want that service as well? And how quickly can you get those products and services to those customers internationally and globally, if it is that you're looking to grow and scale that big? Because that is the potential impact of your service or product that you are supplying as a business. And your investors, or people who are giving you funding, are going to look up for that return on investment, as I mentioned. And potential impact is a measure of how quickly they might be able to get their funding back. And finally, the wow factor. What sets you apart? So what is it about you? What is it about your team, the skill sets in your team, or your product and service that's really unique and sets you apart from other businesses and organizations? It's important to identify what that wow factor is, or that X factor, and really try and sell that. So I'm going to talk about storytelling in a minute. But once you can identify that unique positioning, if you like, that is what is going to help you sell your product, not only to your customers, but to your investors. And just before I leave this slide, I just want to mention down the bottom there on the left-hand side of typical traits that an investor will look for in a business, or key elements. Social impact and sustainability is growing, which is fantastic to know, because a lot of investors were typically looking to invest purely for a financial return, but now they are starting to have measures of social impact and also sustainability. So if your product can deliver a social impact and or improve sustainability as a result of using your product or service, investors are starting to pay more attention to that. And you are therefore able to attract different types of investors and get their attention to then sell them on the highlights, as I mentioned: the market fit, the potential impact of your product or service, and the wow factor of what you and your team and or your product sets you apart. As I mentioned before, the cheapest source of your funding is obviously from revenue, and I highly recommend going through the process of doing a business model canvas. You can go to the website link shown on the screen here, and they'll run you through a video of how to do the chart that's shown on the page here. So it might look quite straightforward, but there's actually quite an interesting process to running through the business model canvas. And most importantly, it does start with your customer and the problems that they have, because when you can solve a customer problem, you become in demand, and then therefore you can set yourself apart with your unique value proposition and provide that service or product to the customer, which generates the funds, which increases your revenues, and then therefore you grow at a faster rate than potentially your competition. And that is what your investors are going to be looking for. I'm now going to talk a little bit about trust and rapport. This article, which I found on the Reserve Bank of Australia website, is really quite powerful, I think, and highlights just how much harder it is for Indigenous and First Nations businesses and entrepreneurs to seek capital. It talks about trust and trustworthiness being a really critical element in business success and also in attracting funding and capital. It gives an example of indicators of trustworthiness being well-resourced networks, past intergenerational advantages, business experience, financial and other assets that you or your business may have, or perhaps someone else in generations gone past, parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, and educational qualifications. And just that list alone, you can see as I run through that, how many areas that potentially Indigenous and First Nations people haven't had the luxury of building those things. And so therefore, in many ways, this article mentions that this leads to a difficulty in attracting low-cost finance. So typically, if you're looking for funding, there will be somewhere where you can get finance. It's just how much you have to pay in terms of interest or the other terms and conditions that might come with it. And then therefore you're at a disadvantage to someone who might be able to get low cost finance or capital. Sometimes it can be hard to find and build your customers, winning contracts, and then having links with reliable suppliers to you so that you can then deliver your product or service. And so all of those things make it that much more difficult. In building trust and rapport, it's really powerful if you can communicate your message through storytelling. And so why not flip it on its head and leverage a skill set that Indigenous and First Nations people have been able to do for 60,000 plus years. And not just able to do, but obviously have a really strong ability to storytell. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the incredible knowledge that we have today, because it hasn't been written down like it is in the Western world. It's communicated through story and through verbal storytelling, if you like. And so if you consider that you need to build trust and rapport to be able to get funding in your business, think about how you can do that with your potential funders. And it may be that it's having conversations and getting to know them. It may be that you start to ask for help and seek through other organizations in your industry, potentially in the areas that you work in. If you have anyone that you know in your current line of work who happens to know people in the area where you've started up your business, ask for introductions. Anytime you can build your network and you can meet people and get to know them better and build that trust and rapport, the more likely you'll be able to seek funding. So when it gets to the actual pitch, in every interaction really, you want to remember that first impressions last. And so consider three things in your storytelling, which I feel like I'm telling you to suck eggs, because I think it comes really naturally to Indigenous people, and particularly those who are connected with culture and are connected with country and with a lot of tradition and ceremony. But you want to capture attention. And so knowing what it is that's going to stand out in your story about your product or service is going to make it memorable for your investors or people who might know other people that could potentially help you in your business, whether that's with funding or whether that's just with support and guidance and help. You also want to build a connection. So do some research before you meet with anyone, whether it's a formal pitch or whether it is just an informal conversation. Do some background research and talk to people, have a look on the internet about that person, and try and find little snippets of information where you might be able to build some common ground. When you've got common ground and a sense of emotional connection with someone else, they're naturally going to be more interested in what you have to say. And again, more likely to be able to remember your presentation or the meeting that they had with you. It's also, in building connection, a really valuable way to work out if your values and your purpose are aligned with the person investing with you. As I mentioned in the earlier slides, seeking investment and getting investors into your business is a long-term relationship, and you want to make sure that your values and your purpose of your business is aligned to the purpose of that person who is funding your organization. And finally, you want to be able to illustrate the market opportunity. It comes back to that return on investment. So if you can tell through stories what the potential value is to the customer and how your product or service solves their problem, you're going to be able to communicate the key message of how you solve a problem and the potential of that market. So leverage the storytelling. It is absolutely a strength of Indigenous and First Nations culture, and do make the most of that to build rapport and make your interactions memorable, whether it's a formal pitch or whether it is just a one-on-one conversation with someone. So in summary, I've shared a few snippets today just about my experiences having lived and worked up in the Pilbara, helping establish the Pilbara Indigenous Business Network, and as the founding chairperson of the Pilbara University Centre. And I've seen a number of organisations, a number of small businesses looking for capital. And I would really stress the point of, number one, considering why you want to raise capital. Do you definitely need those funds that you can't generate through customers paying for your product or service? Or is it something else that you're looking for, skill sets? expertise that you could get from an investor, and have a think about those questions that I raised on the first slide. You then want to identify what helps stand you out. What's really unique about you or your team or your product or service, or ideally all three of them, is going to be what makes you stand out from all of the other people that are asking for funding and funds with investors, and it's going to help make your business and your product and service more memorable. You want to build trust and rapport early, and I say that with a two-way context. So not only do you want to be trusted and build that rapport with an investor for them to be able to invest in you, but you want to be able to suss them out early and trust your gut instinct as to whether you think it's going to be a good relationship long term. So it's a two-way thing. It's not just building trust so that you can get the money from them. It's like you interviewing the investor or the person giving you funding as well to work out if they're a good fit and they're a good partner for you long term in your business. And then finally, leverage the power of storytelling. People will remember emotional connections that they have with other human beings. So do leverage that. Remember what your unique value is, and don't forget to sell that.